Kia koutou, kia ora, it's 1 o'clock. Welcome to this meeting of the Dunedin City Council, hopefully the last, here in the forward room. More details to come as the day wears on, potentially before it reaches relevant items up for discussion in the agenda. Welcome to councillors, to staff, to members of the public and to our media colleagues. We have appearing before us at Public Forum Jack Manning and Michaela Wake-Harvey from the Otago University Students Association. Welcome. Kia ora koutou, the next 5 minutes are all yours.
Kia ora koutou, Mayor Hawkins, councillors. It's good to see you all. Firstly, thank you for the chance to address you today. I've had the distinct pleasure of meeting and working with many of you in the past, but for those who don't know me, my name is Jack Manning and I'm the President at the Otago University Students Association. And to my left is Michaela Wake-Harvey, the Welfare and Equity Rep for OUSA as well. Now, OUSA represents the interests and well-being of roughly 20,000 students at the University of Otago, a sizable portion of the Dunedin city population. And I'm here today to speak to some of the issues that these students face at large and some of the policies that OUSA recommends the DCC implement to address them. Now, Tissue students across Aotearoa New Zealand face various forms of hardship, from financial to mental to academic, and not to mention the particular hardship that has been exposed or otherwise exacerbated by COVID-19. Now, in the context of Otago, one of the largest issues is the quality of housing. Under normal circumstances, property owners would offer properties of high quality and competitive pricing to ensure that they can secure tenants for the coming year. In the North Dunedin student precinct, however, such competition is gridlocked, as the steady influx of student renters has meant that there is little impetus on property owners to improve the housing quality to either win over tenants for the coming year or to justify an increase in rent. And this has resulted in properties that are cold, damp and otherwise not conducive to a healthy lifestyle for the residents. Now, this has been the impetus for a housing crisis that has been developing over many years in the student precinct, and OUSA calls on the DCC to implement a rental warrant of fitness in Dunedin. Sections 145 and 151 of Local Government Act 2002 gives the DCC the jurisdiction and scope to implement such a warrant of fitness, and one is already in place in Wellington to great success. Now, students as renters are also particularly vulnerable, as they are often inexperienced or first-time renters, which is a natural side effect of predominantly their age. Student renters can often be apprehensive to take issues through the proper channels, such as the tenancy tribunal, and are prone to exploitation by landlords as a result. What OUSA recommends to the DCC is the implementation of a landlord licensing scheme to ensure that not only there is a acceptable quality of housing, there's also an acceptable quality of the landlords, to make sure that they are treating their tenants equitably and fairly and not exploiting them as a result of their inexperience. Now, on another issue, so that was housing. On another issue that faces students quite significantly is around harm reduction. So in Dunedin City, there can be what is described at times as a jovial student culture. There are quite a lot of BYO premises around which are very popular with students. However, certain policies have made such premises increasingly inaccessible to students. I'm particularly talking about a policy restricting BYO bottles to 1 per 2 people. Such a policy results in students to preload, as typically it ends up being, preload before going to such a BYO place in order to drink the amount of alcohol that they have determined is a healthy amount for them. But what we are calling on the DCC to do is to change this policy back to 1 bottle per person. And we're doing this from a harm reduction perspective because we believe that it's important that we are incentivising people drinking, firstly in a place that is facilitating social gathering restrictions and making sure that social distancing is being implemented, but also gets people out of drinking in unlicensed places like their flats or at street parties that are much more prone to putting students in vulnerable positions. Now, the final area that I'd like to touch on is, of course, climate change. As climate change makes itself very, very present in our collective futures, it's important that actually local government is truly representing the best interests of students as well as the wider public by addressing climate change with the importance that it deserves. And what OUSA is calling on the DCC to do to address such an issue is to firstly account for the impact and effects of climate change at every level of decision making. We recognise climate change as the greatest threat to both our nation and the world's collective future, and in order to be truly representative of student and youth interests, we believe that the Dunedin City Council should recognise this fact and account for climate change at every level of decision making. We would also like the DCC to develop and commit to a climate change mitigation and adaptation plan by the beginning of 2021. I recognise that the DCC had declared a climate emergency last year. This is a very positive step, but in order to actually make sure that action is followed by such a declaration, it's important that such an issue is addressed with a robust plan that is just, but also accounting for the views and interests of the wider community and stakeholders. So what I've brought before you are 5 policies that are supported by a great number of students. They reflect the interests of students in mitigating the various forms of hardship they face. But also, for 4 out of 5 of these, I'm pleased to say they were actually backed by the majority of this council when they were candidates last year. So I also just want to express OUSA's full willingness to have open discussions about these issues moving forward, and as a key stakeholder in the Dunedin community, we are also very welcome to working with the council collaboratively to address these issues. So thank you, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Just on the Wellington rental warrant of fitness model you mentioned as being successful. I think they had about 3 people use it in its first 12 months, and it's still voluntary rather than compulsory. So I'm just curious as to what your measure of success is.
I'll partially retract the successful bit there. Yeah, no. Thank you for the numbers. There are certainly aspects that I would see changed if it were able to be implemented in Dunedin. Firstly, in order for such a warrant of fitness to really have some teeth, firstly, we believe it shouldn't be voluntary, it should be compulsory, because such a standard that is voluntary would disincentivise landlords who may not meet the criteria for it from using it. And we also believe that it needs to be compulsory to ensure a baseline of transparency between landlords and tenants about the quality of the housing that can often be lost on inexperienced or first-time renters who often aren't aware of what to be looking for when looking at new properties.
Thank you. Councillor Mendes.
You mentioned the issue of flats being cold and damp and the need to do something about that. Do you recognise that there was a nationwide regulation that had to be met last year, that all flats had to have underfloor insulation, for instance?
Are you referring to the Healthy Homes?
No, I'm referring to the requirement of all landlords to have to put underfloor insulation in their flats in all rental accommodation, and the nationwide regulation that has been quite effective in doing that.
And now, address that. Yeah, thank you, Councillor. What I would say is what has been brought to me is student stories about cold houses and that are poorly insulated, and whilst such a policy to insulate would be, really fantastic to see having positive results here, I can say that just considering Dunedin's climate, such insulation clearly isn't enough. We're in a particularly cold city, as you know, and such insulation needs to be running out of words. Did you want to talk to your flat?
Yeah, I can speak as one of the students who has an exemption from that and who lives in a flat that has no insulation under the ground because it physically can't be done. Exemptions are something that's really common across Dunedin because of the way that things have been built, and it's students who are suffering with it because the buildings that we live in are so old. That can't happen. So this is something that needs to be done so that it's transparent to students that when they move in they know that this is something that exists, because again, going back to their inexperience, students don't know what to look for. They go into a flat, they look at it for 10 minutes and then they think it's happy. They don't exactly understand what you need to look for to understand that I'm viewing this in summer, what's it going to be like in winter? So better transparency for students to understand exactly what they're getting into is what we need to help them in their first step towards becoming a tenant, which is usually their first experience, so it's usually where they slip up.
Given that it's now legally required to have this proper insulation, except for those exceptions where it's simply not possible, what do you suggest could be done for those buildings where it actually is impossible to do? And I put it to you that it'd be a very small minority of buildings, owning a few of them myself.
I mean, people have put forward many ideas about what can happen with the exemptions, whether that's incentivising landlords to help pay for power for students because they're having to pump their heating 24/7, or they simply don't do that because students can't afford it. That's the only solution there, or whether it's incentivising a gradual rebuild of those, because it simply is impossible to insulate those buildings. So we need to look at how we, over the next 10, 15, 20 years, look at rebuilding those areas, because there are large blocks of buildings. Talking about, think of the Coronation style buildings that are down in Dunedin Street, which is where I live. Those simply can't be insulated, so how do we look at building better standards, because it's simply impossible to make those better. So that's something that the DCC perhaps need to look at as a long-term plan of working with landlords to make those buildings better.
Thank you. My other question related to the harm reduction call for you to allow people to bring a bottle each for BYO rather than one between two people. How does doubling the amount of alcohol that they can bring in help with harm reduction?
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that one. So, I fully recognise the intent behind such a policy to reduce alcohol amount. In reality, what that often means in Dunedin is that many students will preload and drink before or after such a BYO, still drinking the same amount of alcohol or more, but doing many of it in unlicensed areas where there aren't safety mechanisms in place to reduce harm. And at this moment, we're also particularly aware of social gathering requirements. So we believe that incentivising bringing people to BYO places and not requiring them to, not incentivising off-licence drinking, off-premises drinking, is in the best interest of students in terms of harm reduction. We see many students partying in flats and on streets and stuff, and in order to make students safest, we believe we need to be encouraging them towards licensed premises.
Thank you. Do you recognise that in incentivising off-licence drinking is largely financial, and that it's the fact that it's a lot cheaper is what drives, is the main incentive there?
Well, I would, as much as I would welcome BYO premises competing with cheaper alternatives, so that such a decision is easier and such safer drinking alternatives are more accessible for students. The pricing often, did you have something? Did you want to say that, speak up?
I mean, on top of the pricing, we also need to look at issues like corkage. So that's the payment you make to be able to have and participate in BYO. On top of that price, on top of let alone having to go and buy your own alcohol, is another price that goes on top of that. So that's something that should be paid into it. But in terms of like the actual harm reduction is what we're focusing on. I think
Yes.
the discussion about pricing on off license and that you're talking about like liquor stores.
Yeah,
versus
well, and
and pricing and
supermarkets.
things like that.
Would you support an increase in the price of alcohol in supermarkets to incentivise people to go to controlled drinking areas, for instance?
I mean, that's not exactly what we're focusing on at the moment. We're mainly focusing on harm reduction, talking about the discussion of what's happening
Yeah,
at the
but
moment.
in terms of harm reduction, would you approve of an increase in price of supermarket and off-licence alcohol so that students would be incentivised to drink competitively in more controlled premises?
I mean, the increase in prices in off-licence is something that has perpetuated, but we can also look at back, 20 years ago when there were things like Gardies and there was 50-cent beers and there was still increased student harm associated with that. So cheaper alcohol isn't exactly the answer in these premises. What we're trying to say is that this is one step towards being able to bring students into controlled areas rather than in their flats, which in the past few years we can agree has seen some horrible results in terms of student harm. So bringing them into these areas that are controlled, and also on top of that they have to buy food while they're drinking, so it means that that mitigation happens, they're drinking and eating, reduces the harm that's happening there. That's what we're trying to portray at the moment.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lord, I would remind members of the District Licensing Committee to be cautious around comments they may wish to make around alcohol harm reduction. Councillor Lord.
Just relax, my question's not about alcohol. No, I just had a question. You're talking about what you believe should be a compulsory scheme to get houses up to date, and in view of what Councillor Vandervis has referred to, that there is a standard that should be met, and I also note some low-lying villas that you can't get underneath them, no room to work, but do you recognise that those sorts of expenses on landlords will push your prices for rental up? And so whether you pay a higher rental or whether you pay a lower rental in a power bill, it gives you the choice.
Yeah, look, I do recognise free market economics. I do recognise that it may increase the price, and like that is one flow-on effect that does lead to financial insecurity for students. What we are saying is that there needs to be priority for the housing, the quality of the housing, and addressing the price and stuff will need to go alongside that. We're just simply laying down that the quality of the housing is the most utmost issue. Yeah.
And alongside that, rents increase practically every year for students anyway, so alongside that, the fact that they're increasing anyway, it would be nice that we would at least have these things alongside it to sort of justify why our rents are increasing rather than just because of the market valuation increasing and nothing else really being improved.
You know, that is a fact. I do know that is the case, but I guess that is also reflecting that investors want to get a fair return. But what about the recognising that if you do have those factors as well, you also, if you're going to keep your rents low and they're not going to go up, why do you rent flats that are substandard? Why do you not, as a group, work to actively punish the landlords that don't meet requirements?
I would simply put that down to, as I said before, the competition is gridlocked. There is a finite number of flats in the student area, often overpopulated because there's simply too many students in that area, that students don't really have much of a choice but to go with these flats that are available in North Dunedin. Part of that also comes down to an inaccessibility to live further from campus through public transportation, but that's a different topic in itself. So basically, the way we are trying to address this as a collective is to actually make sure that there is a baseline standard in place through such a reach warrant fitness and licensing scheme. Yeah,
Thank you.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Your Worship. I wonder if a comment that's been made to me on a number of occasions you see as being correct, which is around students, as you say, first-year students, inexperienced, and obviously second-year students getting a flat, and then by the time they realise there's an issue with the flat, whatever that is, it's almost getting towards exam time at the end of the year, and is it worth it because we're moving flats anyway? And I've heard that a number of times. Would that be an accurate assessment of how it goes down often?
I'd say in many cases, yes.
So do you have any mechanism through OUSA to help with advocacy? Because there's certainly a reluctance on the part of students to approach for all sorts of reasons and experience, not wanting to cause a fuss, have their rents go up, whatever it might be, but the problems still remain. Do you have any advocacy mechanisms to support students with that, to raise this with landlords?
Yes, certainly. So, as you know, OUSA runs a student support centre that these students use that students can go to free of charge to receive anonymous counselling, but also advocacy, particularly around stuff like renters' rights, which they are very well versed in. We also, on our executive, have a residential representative who is a student and directly represents those residents and their interests. Yeah. So yes, we do have many mechanisms.
And is it well used?
Yes, very well used. Yeah.
And the second question I had is just a very quick one. Are you aware of the rapid review we're doing around climate change and a significant piece of work? And if not, is there a mechanism for you to keep up with what, or be informed as to what Council is doing in that space?
On a very high level, yes, I am aware of it.
Excellent.
But we, of course, would welcome any opportunity to feed in.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. Kia ora, Jack. Sorry, I don't know your name. Hello.
Michaela.
What's that?
Michaela.
Oh, Michaela. Thanks, Steve. That's nice. Okay, I just have a couple of questions. Did you realise that under the amendment bill of the Healthy Homes Act that landlords have to, it's in the next few years, so some of it's not straight away, but they have to seal all the drafts in a house. They also have to have electric fans, you know, when you're over your oven and in the bathrooms, and they also have to have a heater that gets checked by a calculator on Department of Building and Housing website that has to heat the house, you know, to a certain temperature. Are you aware of that? Because those will make quite, and my next question will be, I mean, obviously those will make quite a few changes, I would imagine.
Yeah, so on a high level, I'm familiar with some of the semantics of this bill. What I will say is what we've often found with houses and the healthy home standard is that often, for the reason that Councillor Van was pointed out earlier, a lot of the houses often are difficult to renovate and in some cases can be exempt in certain ways. That's my understanding. Is that quite?
Do you know what
flats.
percentage that would be?
I don't.
Okay, because in July 1 this year, landlords had to have their houses fully insulated. So if the house isn't fully insulated, you can go and, you know, raise that, like, that's a valid complaint, and you'd have grounds for that because they have to have that, and they actually have to list it in their, you know, tenancy agreement. So that, yeah, so the houses should be warmer. Yeah.
Thank you. We agree.
That's all right. I hope that helps.
Councillor O'Malley.
Thanks, Michaela. Jack. It's an implementation question. The points that you've brought up, apart from the district licensing one, effectively require resource to be implemented. So if we're going to do building warrant of fitness, as you pointed out, I think Rate My Flat hasn't had a massive impact either. It will require staffing, and therefore that will require funds, which comes up in our long-term plan, which is starting next year. Same with the implementation of the climate change. So my question is, what role do you plan to play or will you play in helping us with the long-term plan towards these objectives? Because you are the owners of the knowledge in some respects in some of this. And it will require an actual commitment of council of funds, which will come up in the long-term plan to execute these things.
Yeah. Did you want to speak to Rate?
I mean, yeah, Rate My Flat, in terms of that, it has been defined for quite a while, so that's probably why it's ineffective. It's information about flats from 6 years ago, and that means it's not really effective for students now. But in terms of our commitment, we're very committed. We have a newly created political rep who's specifically designed to feed into things like this. I'm sure you've met her through submissions and all those things, but of course we're committed to help out in any way and be submitting anything a part of it, and our student support centre is very well resourced to be able to convey this information to students when they come to them and need it. And
yeah, as a stakeholder in the city, we'll be happy to of course.
So, yeah, because I guess that's what I'm asking would be, so obviously that's the whole point, like something like that needs to be updated every year. In 6 years it comes so out of date that it's no longer relevant, and therefore without that resource. So when you're putting that together, will you be able to come up with the kind of level of resource commitment that you think we'll need to commit to be able to?
I don't have the answer for you right now on that. I just know that, like you say, we will be happy to feed into such discussions about resourcing, of course. We do see this as quite a significant issue, as it impacts a very large portion of the Dunedin city population.
Councillor Walker.
Yeah, thanks, Jack and Michaela. Thanks for coming in. Most of my questions have been asked and answered. A very simple one. How long has the Wellington scheme been in place, the warrant fitness?
Actually, I don't know the year it was established, but it's been a few years. A few years, I
Okay.
believe.
Cool, I'll have a look at it. And my main question was around the rapid review, and I just want to back up what Councillor Gary said by making sure you guys, where you can, feed into that process. Really important.
Yeah,
Cheers.
thank you. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have just got word, obviously also some of you may have been on the same news notification alerts as I am, that there are currently now no active cases of COVID-19 in New Zealand, which is testament to what has been a significant collective effort. And long may it continue as obviously the conversation moves on to border control measures and the likes. There are no apologies for the meeting. I'll move that we confirm the agenda with the following addition and alteration in regard to Standing Order 21.4, that option C be adopted in relation to moving and seconding and speaking to amendments. Seconded, Councillor Gary. Councillor Wiley.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would like to table an item for consideration on the June 30th meeting. The GSO has the wording that I would like to bring to this meeting.
So you're foreshadowing a subsequent motion should the confirmation of the agenda not be approved.
Correct.
Would you like to speak to it, sir?
Thank you. So essentially, when I read through this paper for item 8, for item 6, sorry.
He's speaking to the motion.
Yeah,
of the
I'll second
confirmation.
it. I'll second
It doesn't require a
Well,
seconder.
but Councillor Benson Pope said he needed a seconder.
Councillor Houlihan. It's going to be a long afternoon. Councillor Wiley is speaking to the motion is to confirm the agenda. Okay. And in speaking to that is foreshadowing a subsequent motion should that fail. Sorry.
When I look at the agenda and I look at item 6, I believe that we need more engagement in that process, and I can't see the need to try and rush something through at this meeting, so hence the motion in front of us.
Thank you. Further speakers? Councillor Vandervis.
I too was concerned by item 6, the normal a situation that has arisen all too often in council where a subcommittee is formed simply by getting a selection of chairs to form that committee isn't always, I believe, appropriate for the particular discussion involved, and this issue would be a classic case in point. The proposal to just have chairs of committees, for instance, excludes the two most CBD retail business experienced councillors that are here, both myself and Councillor Raddick. I am not interested in being on this committee myself since my retail experience in the CBD is now 20 years out of date. But Councillor Raddick has probably more experience than anybody in this room, I hazard to guess, regarding this particular issue. And I think it's important that at least one councillor with that degree of experience in this area should also be on this committee. So therefore I support deferring it till we've had a workshop, we can find out exactly really what the best makeup would be for this committee, because it's an important one for George Street going forward.
So to be clear, Councillor, you're suggesting we have a non-public meeting of councillors to debate who might be appointed to this group?
I'm not presuming anything, Your Worship. I'm just saying that I believe that the current agenda is not ideal, and that if we were to defer it till the next meeting, as it isn't necessarily that urgent currently, that we have an opportunity to have a better mix and a more inclusive mix of people for this advisory committee.
Councillor O'Malley?
My question's a technical one, really. This looks like a tabling motion. Is it done here, or is it done when the item comes up?
Might as well deal with it here. I mean, the difference being doing it this way gives people the opportunity to speak to it, where a procedural motion doesn't allow for discussion.
Okay. Oh, well, then I'll probably vote down the current motion so we can see this, because I think when we talk about participatory democracy, we've got to be careful about how we make these groups up. And I am a little concerned about the extent to which us as a representative body had much to do with the formation of this group. And I know it was instructed to staff. Have a feeling, though, I don't have enough information at the moment to make what I feel a comfortably informed decision. So that's why I'd like it moved to the 30th of June meeting.
Councillor Reddick?
Yes, I'm happy to reject the agenda and have this motion tabled. I support this motion to table the item 6. To me, it appears there are several parties and groups that ought to be included in the format of the panel, and also perhaps some minor changes to the, I suppose, the terms of reference of the panel. But I think it would be good to have a couple of workshops between now and the 30th of June in order to discuss that and amongst the, with the councillors, and to come to some collective agreement about who should be on the panel and what they should be discussing.
The forum for coming to a collective agreement about council appointments is at a council meeting, and that's why it's on the agenda as requested by council for discussion today. Councillor Houlihan.
Oh, thank you, Your Worship. Yes, I'll definitely be supporting this motion and hoping that the other one is put off till the 30th of June. My decision for that is that I feel we didn't have a lot of engagement. We discussed it, it was really quick. I knew it was going to happen, but I thought council would have had involvement on helping to, maybe even an email might have gone out and said, who do you think might be on this? Nothing like that happened. Instead, I think there was a couple of people who were involved in that, and I think we need to make it more as a participatory engagement process, which I think is really important. And if we want to show the public that we are coming with them on this journey and not rile them even any more than they already are, we need to show them that we're open to engagement. True engagement means bringing in some of the harshest critics of this and letting them come and discuss it with us, where we open it up and we say, oh, let's look at what we can do instead of saying, we don't want you in the group. So that's my feeling with this, and I hope this happens. Thank you.
Councillor Barker.
I too support tabling this. When I went through the report and looked at it and thought about the groups that might be involved,
If we could have one person talking at a time, that would be helpful. Thank you.
thought about the groups that might be involved, I came up with a list and I wrote all over this. So I do actually support taking it back to perhaps a workshop and then coming up with a more cohesive plan. We've had OUSA at the public forum here today, and they're not actually on the membership of the advisory group, and I would have thought, as they'd said in the annual plan hearings that they wanted to be involved, that they would be a good one to be involved, and I feel that perhaps it needs a bit more discussion before it comes for signing off.
Councillor Elder.
Thank you. I too support delaying till the 30th of June, and for similar reasons to what other people have said. I believe we need to relook at some of the terms of reference wording, just to make it more inclusive and participatory. Also, at point 8 on the previous page, it says ensuring the specific interests of George Street were represented, but there weren't specific retailers mentioned in that, except a chamber retail representative. So I just think there needs to be more discussion and more clarification, one on the terms of reference and two on identifying the key stakeholders. So I support the motion to defer and I support this amendment.
Councillor Staines.
Thank you, Worship. I also think that the terms of reference are only going to meet and produce greater anger amongst the retailers. If you look at the list of people represented, the retailers' representation is by far the minority, and I accept that we want to get a cross-section of our community, but I think the initial reaction, if we were to go ahead with this at this stage, would be a very negative one again, and I think we need to think this out a little bit more, so I would appreciate moving it out to the 30th.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Your Worship. Well, I have a different view. Because we have two representative bodies here representing retail. And I would have thought that the retail of George Street would be part of the Chamber of Commerce and part of the heart of Dunedin. And I think that that is very strong representation here. There are a whole lot of other groups that need to be part of it, and they're listed there. I do think the ability of this group to co-opt as required. So, for example, we've talked about the student body as being really important in terms of customers going forward of the retail group, in terms of retail trends. So at the times when it's useful to have that voice, then they could be co-opted as an example. But I think there's a real variety here in the list, and that opportunity to co-op would perhaps satisfy those who think there are some folk missing. I do think they need to be groups, because otherwise you get into the plain favourites, and I don't think that's helpful either.
Councillor Walker.
Yeah, I'm sort of on the fence a wee bit in this, but and perhaps I may be missing something, but my understanding of the whole point of item 6 being on the agenda was for us to have an open, frank, public debate about the process. Surely, excuse me if I am missing something, but that, for me, was the very point of this item. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Councillor Lord.
I agree with what Councillor Walker's just said. I thought today was the place to have that discussion, but in view of the fact that so many people have spoken about deferring it and having a workshop, I'm quite happy to go down that way too. My feeling, just in response to Councillor Gary's comments, yes, there is always the ability to co-opt, but I think the danger is that groups don't tend to co-opt enough, and I feel that the weighting is very low on the retailers. I think the people that are most at stake should have a greater average weighting. Like, for example, you could have Heart of Dunedin, Gen Zero can straight away vote them down, and I see them as basically an activist group.
Yep.
Which one, sorry?
Oh, Generation Zero.
Oh, not the AA.
Yeah. Did you say they're not there?
No, not the AA, I just wasn't clear.
No. Well, the AA could be the same. I've got to declare I'm a member of that group. No, look, I just think that something that's as vital as this, when we had Susie Staley for one, and we had Nina Rivett speak to us through the long-term plan, or through the annual plan, but we also had Tony Clear come. I think that while they are feeling like they are, and the likes of Brent Weatherall, I think that we need to be in a position where we have at least 3 representatives from the main street, one way or another, and to sort of balance up and give that group some weighting as well. And I'm not saying that, I'm not saying any particular 3, but I think there are people that need to be involved, and whether we choose those representatives or they choose those representatives, I just feel that they should be giving some weighting in this. I'm not against any of this work, and I think you'll find a lot of those people aren't. But what we do need to do is take them along the journey, not just tell them this is what's happening.
Thank you. I do find it remarkable that the solution here seems to be to not wanting us to have the debate at the meeting, where any member of this body can move an amendment to the terms of reference, can move an amendment to the membership of that group, and rather than doing that in a public way, as we should for council appointments on pieces of work that are as significant as this, the suggestion is that we go and have a couple of private meetings amongst ourselves. We thrash out who the membership might be or who the terms of reference might be, and then come back on the 30th of June and present that for nominal debate and discussion at the council meeting. And I think to...
Point of order, Your Worship.
Point of order, Councillor Vanavis.
There is absolutely no suggestion that it would be nominal debate at the
My
30th.
apologies, I'll withdraw the qualifier around the calibre of the debate that would ensue on the 30th of June as a result of our non-public workshops discussing the membership of the group. I think today is the report we have in front of us is a response to a request we made of staff to bring back a report for discussion and debate and amendment. And this is a feedback group on a piece of work that Council is committed to doing ongoing. That work isn't going to stop while we navel gaze around the membership of the advisory group. And I think I can't see how...
Point of order, Your Worship.
Yeah.
I'm not navel gazing, so who's doing the navel gazing?
Yeah, neither am I.
Yeah.
I'll withdraw, sir. I can't see how the interests of the affected parties are best served by delaying the reconstitution and reformation of a group whose sole purpose is to provide opportunities for them to feedback into this work, which won't stop while we come to a consensus decision about what the makeup of that group might be and what the terms of reference for that group might be. So lest people think that that's how this is going to roll out, I don't see this as being a solution to that problem. It's not it's not going to filibuster the George Street work. Further speakers, Councillor Benson-Pope.
Thank you. I think the nub of this, Your Worship, is the comment you just made. We reconstituted this group so that we had better communication with whomever, because we haven't decided the nature of the group. That's what's on the order paper today. And if we delay further, that communication with whatever group it is going to happen later. So it seems to me that supporting the motion for delay, while it doesn't create problems, it's counterproductive. And certainly doesn't achieve what Council originally wanted to do, as in reconstituting the group to make sure people have accurate information about what's proposed, and I just can't quite see the point of it, actually.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. All those in favour?
Aye.
Which motion have you put, Your Worship?
So this is in favour of this, is it? Is that
No.
what
No, this is a subsequent motion foreshadowed,
Oh, right.
is what you see on the table.
Okay.
The resolution is to confirm the agenda and have the debate and give people the opportunity to make amendments to the terms of reference and the membership should they wish to.
So, excuse me, Your Worship. So essentially we have to say no to, for clarification's sake, we have to say no to confirming the agenda.
Yeah, that's how you would get to dealing with your subsequent motion.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. All those in favour?
No.
Aye.
No.
Those against?
Division, please.
Take it by division. Thank you, Councillor.
Councillor Barker.
No.
Councillor Benson-Pope.
Aye.
Councillor Elder. No. Councillor Gary.
Aye.
Councillor Hall.
What are we voting on?
Councillor Houlihan.
Well, can I just, I'm not sure what I'm voting on here, sorry. What am I voting on?
Confirmation of the agenda.
No, you're not voting on the screen.
Regard to standing... So is this nothing to do with what we were talking about before? I'm confused, sorry.
You're voting on what is on the screen, Councillor.
But I don't know what that is. Option
You
C.
can abstain
But
if
that's
you don't
just our
understand.
normal thing that we... Oh, yes, that's
That's right.
no, then.
Councillor Lefiso. Aye. Councillor Lord.
No.
Councillor O'Malley.
No.
Councillor Raddick.
No.
Councillor Staines.
No.
Councillor Vandervis.
No.
Councillor Walker.
Aye.
Councillor Wiley.
No.
Your Worship.
Aye.
Motion lost 10-5.
So Councillor Wiley, you're now moving this with the inclusion of your amendment as clause C.
Correct.
I'm going to second it. Second, Councillor Reddick. Further speakers?
Yes.
Councillor Houlihan.
Yes, I would just like to say that some of the comments that were made before, I'd like to clarify that because, you know, I think it's really important that we take this seriously as far as engagement and also get a feel for what's happening in our city at the moment. And I think to take time on this shows how important, you know, it's too important to just rush it through. My feeling is it's been really rushed through. I was surprised. There was, looking at the list that was in there, and I was also surprised that we didn't have input into that. I really hope also that we have the addition, I was surprised as well that the Chair of Economic Development wasn't in there. So I think there's quite a lot that needs to be discussed, and to infer that we're trying to do this discussion in private to shut the public out of this is absolutely not true. We just want to have fair and discussions around who should be in this and make sure we bring the stakeholder groups with us and engage.
Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you, Bishop. I already wanted to touch on the concept that in understanding orders we can have a robust debate, because you only, understanding orders, have an opportunity to ask questions, and then you only get to speak once. So therefore, in that environment, if somebody speaks after you with a valid point that you would like to embellish on, your chance of debate is over. So workshops are places we are not allowed to make decisions, we know that, and the implication that we are going to go into a workshop and make a decision would be disingenuous about our intent of going in. It's more the opportunity to share ideas and make sure that we're comfortable with the general scope of what we're looking at, and then it comes back to the public venue again here, where the public are present to observe our decision-making processes, and those who have any objection to that decision-making process can raise them in a public forum at that time. So really I'm just saying that often as not, to say that something comes to council in the form of a paper and then it'll able to be substantially changed is not likely. And in fact, we've had a couple of completely mangled outcomes when we've tried to design something on the fly in the middle of a council meeting. So this isn't about not necessarily not liking what's in it, as much as it's the saying, I don't think we've had the full debate all the way through. And I really do think that we will get a better outcome if we just address this one more time before we come back. And I don't think 3 weeks is going to be a big issue, given that really it only got asked for during the annual plan, otherwise it wouldn't be in front of us now either.
Councillor Elder.
Hi, I was just referring to some consultations or engagements that we're doing right now with the Coastal Otago engagement with Ocean Beach, and the format of that is engaging all the stakeholders before any plans are made so that they have input into it, and also the South Dunedin Library process, which again is getting all the key stakeholders involved before decisions are made, and they input into the ongoing formation of the plan. And I just see there are different ways of engaging, and this gives us an opportunity to do things differently. And I think having that discussion is really important. So we need to take people on a journey with us on this.
Councillor Reddick.
Yes, I think this whole discussion speaks to the way that things get done here. So we have a resolution of some type appears before us, and then that's what we have to consider. So I'm very much in favour of the concept of having workshops prior to we get here, so that all inputs can be received, so that we can have participatory discussion amongst just the council members for what gets discussed here. Because what happens is that someone comes up with an order, with a resolution or paper and a motion, and that's what we get to discuss. It's very difficult to redesign that or to discuss that in this forum. And I don't think it's appropriate that stuff comes up to be debated. It certainly can be debated in the forum, but we have no opportunity to co-design and redesign. And many submitters at our annual plan submissions commented on the need for co-design or co-creation or participation in our democracy. And so I'd like to see democracy that is actually seen to be done. And so having the councillors have some say and some discussion on the terms of reference of this group and input into the membership of this group, I think is vitally important if our citizens are to see democracy in action. And many of them have raised concerns about the situation that we find ourselves in now. As you know, social media is rife with dissent about the way things have gone, and similarly letters to the newspaper are very regularly not in favour of what has gone on. So I think it's important that we just take a step and approach this a lot more seriously, because this is a critically important matter on which we are spending an awful lot of money. It is very important that everybody in the community comes with us, and it's a relatively straightforward process to achieve that.
Thank you. I didn't want to interrupt you, Councillor, but I don't think it's a fair description of process to suggest that all we have to discuss and debate is the paper and the resolutions that are presented on the order paper. There is, as I have pointed out, the opportunity for anybody at this meeting, as you have taken the opportunity to previously at meetings, move amendments and make additions and alterations to things as they are presented to us. So those opportunities do exist. I certainly agree with your comments around councillors being able to have input into the membership of the group and the composition of the terms of reference, which is exactly what I intended to do as part of this meeting, with it on the agenda, to have a public discussion about the composition of the group and the terms of reference, as opposed to kicking the can down the road and having the same conversation on the 30th of June. And in response to Councillor Elder's comments, I don't know if it's a fair comparison to compare this work to a project like the South Dunedin Library, which is in its design stages, or the Ocean Beach work, which is, again, in the early stages of an ongoing piece of work. This is a significantly advanced project that Council has endorsed the last time it came before us, and the request from Council to reconstitute the Central City Advisory Group was to provide feedback through the detailed design phase. It's not an opportunity to relitigate the project. It's not a Trojan horse for people who want to see the project stopped to have the opportunity to do that. It's an opportunity to be able to, as the modelling evolves and the detailed design work evolves on this project, for the various stakeholders, of which retailers and hospitality businesses are some but not all, to be involved in that work. And again, it's disappointing for me that we won't be able to get that group together sooner, because I think the public interest has demonstrated to me that those affected parties are keen to be involved in this work sooner rather than later, but the decisions that Council look like they're making at this meeting will prohibit them from being able to do that, and that is disappointing. Further speakers?
Yep.
Councillor Walker.
Yeah, very briefly, I just wanted to say that Councillor Raddich's 5 minutes just confirmed the very thing we were due to do by having it as item 6 on the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Barker.
I support deferring it. When I look through the amount of things that I had to, or groups that I thought that I might like to suggest, I actually had 8, and I thought that might extend the discussion for a very, very long time as we went through all of these. So it would be good to have a workshop, talk through some of these groups that everybody probably has 8 of their own to bring up, and then bring it back as a more robust membership. I also bring up that there's already a little bit of discussion around whether it's co-opting or consulting, and I note that in the paper there isn't an ability to co-opt, it says to consult with. So there's semantics around some of the words as well.
Well, should we have got to that agenda item? It was my suggestion. was proposing to move an amendment that gave it the power to co-opt, but we'll never get there, it doesn't seem. Councillor Lawfessel.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would just like to observe a couple of things for me. There's been a lot of talk about democracy. Well, as far as I'm concerned, you know, we live in a society that privileges the majority, which isn't minorities, particularly tangata whenua. So I find it quite rich that the arguments for this motion to go through is hypocritical to me, because there's a whole lot of people that don't participate. They don't even voice to our surveys, to our engagement, whatever. They don't turn up to our stuff. And yet our decisions still affect them. So I just think it's, while Councillor O'Malley has said that he didn't dislike what was in the report, I just think that for me, I did like what was in the report. I looked firstly for aukaha, or some input from mana whenua, and I felt like Councillor Gary that the retailers' interests would be satisfied. And to me, this whole motion is about, there's a few loud voices. Just because you speak loudly and complain vociferously doesn't mean you should have a place at a decision-making body or a workshopping body, in my opinion. So I'm going to be voting against this, because I think we need to, you know, some people haven't got their way, so what? We got to continue and move forward, because we know there is a lot of disharmony, whatever, and we won't. There were some people who are determined not to go on the journey. So let's just think about everybody, not just a few who didn't get their way.
Thank you. Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll be voting against this, and I really take offence at the idea that just because one supports the representative groups in the report, that one doesn't support participation and real engagement. Participation and real engagement are going to be really important. We've all agreed on that. I don't think there's any disagreement on that in terms of as we go through the detailed design process. But what we're looking at here is establishing a group and establishing them as quickly as possible. And I call on Chamber of Commerce and Heart of Dunedin to ensure that they do represent those retailers that are impacted by this, and I call on those retailers to get involved with those groups. And I don't think anything's served by delaying. So I'll be voting against this.
Thank you. Further speakers? I'll come back to you.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah. Right now, Councillor Wiley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, this is quite a taxing issue for everybody. It is really, does show the sentiment around George Street. But really, I think that when we look at delaying this until the 30th of June, it really goes back to why are we delaying it in the first place. And for me, the heart of it came through with what we were given as a terms of reference and what the group was. And when I saw that OUSA weren't involved, when I saw that our own youth council were not involved, when I saw that there was no George Street business as individuals involved, property owner group, emergency services. Again, I've heard before, the Chair of Economic Development should be there.
Yes.
I agree with that. Where are the courier and freight companies? Where are the taxis? Where are the people that have voiced their opinions time and time again? But again, we can actually have the best advisory group and no one turns up. We've seen that before. So what we want to be doing here, and this is why coming back on the 30th, is getting the right advisory group where people feel they can engage and be heard. For example, there could be subgroups that feed into their representatives and going on that basis. Again, we could establish a process around the meetings where they're Zoom linked and recorded. So even those that can't attend the meetings can actually still engage. We've seen how effective that's worked.
Great idea.
Personally, I'd like to see an independent chair because we know how much political football there is on this around the city.
Yep.
But it's about making sure there is clear engagement.
Councillor, the right of reply is an opportunity to respond to comments that have been made in the debate. It's a privileged position in which the comments that you now make, people aren't able to respond to. So if you wish to relitigate who the chair of any potential group might be, I would suggest that this isn't the forum for you to do that.
I will remove that. I'll retract that.
Thank you.
Thank you. So then I hear that it's kicking the can down the road. I'm sorry, it's not kicking the can down the road. I actually think we'll get a process that speeds up rather than gets bogged down. We will get a process that actually will work. And it won't be all about the loud voices. It will be about the right voices and the affected voices. The other thing about George Street, and we heard the comment about workshops. George Street has been workshopped continuously through council. Adding a workshop around one of the key ingredients of what is going to be in the direction of George Street, I'm sorry, I actually find that really frustrating to think that one of the key criteria of how to move this forward is not going to be workshopped, it's not going to be discussed. We were to take something that was on paper and try and modify it to this meeting. So I'm really struggling with that process. So it's not about rushing this through. It's not about prohibiting anything. It's about getting clear engagement, clarity of panel, effective engagement and open minds, and getting the best outcome for our city. But letting our residents know that their passion has been heard, but also the fact that actually everybody will be able to understand what is happening with George Street. And I don't think we've been as good as we could on that. So moving into a council meeting on the 30th of June, I believe is the right outcome. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. All those in favour?
Aye.
Those against?
No.
Maybe do it on a show of hands, please. Those in favour?
Division, please.
Oh, my division, thank you.
Councillor Barker.
Aye.
Councillor Benson-Pope.
No.
Councillor Elder.
Aye.
Councillor Gary.
No.
Councillor Hall.
Aye.
Councillor Houlihan.
Aye.
Councillor Lefiso.
No.
Councillor Lord.
Aye.
Councillor O'Malley.
Aye.
Councillor Raddick.
Aye.
Councillor Staines.
Aye.
Councillor Vandervis.
Yes.
Councillor Walker.
No.
Councillor Wiley.
Yes.
Your Worship.
No.
Carried 10-5.
Excellent. We have an agenda, ladies and gentlemen. Item 5, District Licensing Committee membership review process. Might want to keep the lease on the forward room, depending on how big our Central City Advisory Group gets to be. Oh, sorry. Item 4 is declarations of interest. Any amendments to make to the declarations of interest? In which case I'll move that Council notes the elected members' interest register, confirms the proposed management plan, and C, notes the proposed management plan for the executive leadership team. Seconded, Councillor Gary. Any discussion? I'll put it. All those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? That's agreed. I'm assuming District Licensing Committee members are withdrawing from this following item. Councillor Benson-Pope is sitting back.
Yeah, I better do too.
Councillor Lord is sitting back. Councillor Vandervis?
No, I don't believe I'll be sitting back.
This is item 5, the District
Yes,
Licensing
I know
Committee.
what item it is. You remember?
You're a member of the District Licensing Committee, Councillor.
Yes, and I have some questions I want to ask about why this paper was covered.
I would like some advice from staff around managing Councillor Vandervis's conflicts of interest as a member of the DLC. You can. I'll move that we adjourn the meeting. Seconded, Councillor Gary for 5 minutes. All those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? That's agreed. Councillor Andrews, I understand you have a question of staff. Councillors.
Yeah, the question that I wanted to ask publicly, Your Worship, was did we have a legal requirement to reconstitute the membership of this committee? And it wasn't clear in the paper. I've had an assurance from Ms Graham that yes, there was a requirement, and that requirement has actually already lapsed. We've gone past the 5 years. And given that it is a legal requirement, that this does need to take place, I'm perfectly happy then to sit back on that basis.
Thank you, Councillor. That's helpful. And Councillor Lord is hovering awkwardly back there. And Councillor Benson Pope is slightly further back from his desk too. And so questions withdraw by degrees. Questions of staff, or the staff report. Councillor Wiley.
Thank you, Worship. Mr Pickford, do you think that actually the timeline of the 31st of July 2020 is appropriate, or is it because it seems to be pretty quietly a fine timeline based on what needs to be done?
Through the Chair, Councillor, you're referring to being quite tight in order to get it done. So we believe we can get it done if we, the Council makes a decision on the form of the panel today, and we can start the process of advertising and so on. And then when we come back on the 30th with the make of the panel and delegations or whatever it decides, then that does give us enough time. It is tight, but we just want to try and move things along, given we had said we'd come back in March, but have been obviously delayed through the COVID issues.
So when you talk about the panel, you're talking about option 1, option 2 or option 3?
Yes, whichever. I mean, we can begin with the advertising process, soliciting interest straight away.
Okay.
Whichever option the Council chooses.
Okay. When we look at option 2, it talks about external parties, and it'll talk about police and health representatives. Yet, quite often, police and health are submitting to the panels. And I believe somewhere in the report it actually makes reference to, sorry, bear with me, I think it's 5.1 or something.
So the legislation precludes membership of a police officer, or which I think is what you're referring to.
3.1, yeah.
Yes, so that's correct. But what we're suggesting here is that if the Council chose option 2, it would allow external parties to input into the selection of the panel, the selection of those members. It doesn't mean they will become. We're not suggesting that the police become part of the DLC, as you say. They are agencies reporting. But given the feedback through the review was that currently DLCs, not just in Dunedin but across the country, aren't really representative of the communities that they are representing, I suppose. One way you could do is that it might be that you have a Māori representative on there and able to provide input from that perspective. But these were just suggestions. I just put those in there as examples. You could choose.
Okay. One of the things that I looked at as I read through this, and then looking at what's going to happen with potential marijuana referendum, would that then fit under this sort of model? Would be a totally separate entity later on, should that referendum pass, or?
I couldn't really comment on that at all.
Yeah, no, okay. So I think that's all the questions I have for right now.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to, just picking up on the timeline question from Councillor Wiley, as far as I'm aware, there aren't any council meetings scheduled between the 30th of June where we would sign off on or was there a suggestion that we make the appointments at the meeting on the 30th of June?
No, we would come back to you on the 30th of June with if the Council chose, for example, a subcommittee, then we could bring back a report on the 30th of June with the makeup of that committee.
But not of the appointments themselves?
No. So we would then once, because through June we would do the advertising. 30 June Council would decide on the makeup of the panel to select the membership, and and then through that, and then we would come back at the end of July, towards the end of July, I can't remember the date now, with a report that Council would then endorse with making up the DLC, which would then kick in on the 3rd of August. I think those are the dates, remember?
Yeah, thanks. I only asked that because, to the best of my recollection, there aren't any council meetings scheduled in July. So between the 30th of June and where we sign off on the subcommittee potentially, or model, and the 31st of July, which is when these warrants expire, there isn't a council meeting currently scheduled as far as... There is one on the 28th of July. Okay.
Yes.
Fine, thank you. That's easier. Councillor Elder.
So, just in your view, the thought of external parties contributing to this, what do you think the strengths of that kind of way of looking at things would be?
Through the chair, I think it just allows a more representative view of the communities you're serving. I mean, it's when you look at DLCs generally, and the report talks to this a little bit, that they're not very ethnically diverse. Māori suffer greatly from alcohol-related harm, and yet they're often not represented on DLCs. And that's just one example. But there'll be other communities as well that aren't really represented through that, don't have a voice. And so this is an opportunity to put some redress around that.
Thank you.
Councillor Walker.
Yeah, thank you. A couple of questions. Firstly, on number 17, where you mention that one DLC is considered appropriate for Dunedin. I presume that's still the case, but what are the, I mean, is that something that may change in the future? Are there metrics around how you work that out?
I believe it's just up to the council. I don't know whether Anne has any comment on that. I don't know. It's only very large authorities would have more than one DLC. Wellington, Auckland, some very large cities. Okay. But for us, we thought one was appropriate.
So potentially in the future it could change?
Potentially,
okay,
yeah.
Cool. And my second question is probably something that's worrying all councillors. If we look at the list of current DLC committee membership, which is disgracefully skewed in the direction of not only males, which is obvious by the list unless some females have strange first names. Can you answer, within this list, it's harder to know within this current list if any of those people are Māori or Pacifica? Do you know?
None of them are, as far as we know.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor O'Malley.
Your Worship, I just want to follow up on the point that Councillor Wiley made, and it's on page 44, the legal exceptions, like who shouldn't be on the committee, who can't be on one, and then page 50 through 52, the suggestions of who to involve. And I noticed that when you suggest who to involve, none of those people who are exempted, who shouldn't be on, are in that list of who to involve. Because would you agree that there's an issue that when you come to selection of a panel, if you think that certain people shouldn't be on a panel, then would you not be opening yourself up if you allowed the influence to the selection of that panel by people who are actually not allowed to be on the panel? So I'm looking at option 2, where you've got Māori police and health representatives. Should we be very careful about police and health representatives, or how we achieve those based on the list on page 44 who shouldn't be on the panel at all? Because it just seems there's a potential conflict there. If that particular group is there, on the other side of it, the rest of it, general community involvement, obviously where we're heading in that direction, I assume, by that clause.
Yes, I think that's a fair point.
Councillor Walker.
Yes, sorry, I had another question that I've just been reminded of. So in terms of going back to my previous point around the skewed makeup of the current panel, can I ask what was the previous process used to select this current panel?
That was option 1. This was in 2013.
Thank you. That's all I need to know. Thank you.
Just seeking certainty that the paper making appointments to the DLC will come back in the non-public part of the meeting when it finally makes its way back to Council.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Councillor Wiley wishes to move something.
Yeah, yes, Your Worship, I would like to move option 2.
Thank you. Second to Councillor Walker. Would you like to speak to it?
basically, I think that will be, for me, this will be the best outcome of how we can go through this process and get a good DLC licensing committee.
Thank you. Councillor Walker?
Yep. The reason I seconded that, and of course, moving on from my question earlier, is any option for me that moves us away from a process that does throw up a committee that is primarily made up of, I'll be careful here, ageing, older white males, is definitely good by me. The current membership was, to me, quite clearly selected by a process that doesn't even give even the slightest regard to in any way replicating the community of Dunedin. Unless I'm mistaken, Dunedin only has 11% women, not from what I can see. So I'm just really pro any system that forces us to face diversity and make sure that we include it in what ultimately is a really important committee, and as somebody else has previously pointed out, without any Māori representation. I think that's a shame on us, considering the effects that alcohol has had on that community, and I think they rightly deserve a place at that table. Thank you.
Councillor O'Malley.
Your Worship, yeah, I'm comfortable with this option as well, and I think it's good that it's including community input, and I'm sure that the staff will be able to manage the balance between the excluded list, which are effectively officers of those institutions, and those institutions.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Your Worship. With no disrespect to the previous committee, I do think the time has come for more diversity, and we heard this morning in our public forum the OUSA talking about these very kinds of matters and having a particular perspective on it. And so thinking about other work being done with the university and thinking that it would be good to have that range of people from the community on this new panel.
Thank you. Councillor Elder.
The question I asked of Simon was what were the advantages of having external parties seconded to the subcommittee, and I think the thing for me is that in fact we do have a diverse community and they need to be represented at every level, and in particular on this committee, because there's certain areas that are, suffer more harm than others. So I'm really happy to support this motion.
Councillor Barker.
I support this motion as it looks to be the most robust and transparent process, and hopefully we'll have a different outcome.
Councillor Wiley.
Thank you, Worship. I'll keep it really short and brief, but I think generally we can have a great subcommittee, but if we don't have the right applicants, or we don't have enough applicants, I think that is the number one thing we have to really deal with here, is just hope we get a great selection of applicants, that it becomes very difficult to appoint or basically separate them because the quality is so strong. So I think what we definitely want to do is, as this goes out to market, really through all our own networks, is get our community friends who we think would be good, appropriate people to see the ad, and basically make sure we do spread it far and wide.
Yeah.
Before I put it, and this is unconventional, but I just wonder if you would be comfortable with amending that to remove reference to option 2, and to just say that the council forms a subcommittee of council that will manage the DLC membership review process. Just makes it easier for people referencing it in the future.
Perfect.
No gross objection. I'll put it. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Those against? That's agreed. Thank you. I've been asked for an afternoon tea break, and benevolently in granting one. I'll move that we adjourn the meeting for 15 minutes. Seconded Councillor Elder. All those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? That's agreed. We're back at 3:41.
241.
2:41.
Oh, what time? 2:41.
Selectmen, DCC submission, death, funerals, burial and cremation, a review of the Burial and Cremation Act 1964 and related legislation. Welcome back. Ms Graham and Mr Brinkley, I understand. Mr West is on his feet. Welcome.
You don't want to do the threesome?
I think Doug should sit back.
Given the subject at hand, perhaps even less appropriate than an ordinary otherwise would have been. Welcome, gentlemen. Any opening comments you wish to make on this?
No, we're just happy to take questions.
Thank you. Questions, councillors?
Should Doug be sitting back?
Yeah.
Is there something you know about his imminent demise that we don't?
Yes,
He's certainly going to be next to go.
into the 90s, so watch it.
Oh dear.
No.
I think I'll ask one.
Councillor Walker?
Yeah, thank you. It was quite morbid reading at times, this,
Yeah.
particularly the stuff around body disposal, new methods. And that's my question. On point 25, which talks about the new methods of body disposal, I guess by going this way, are we trying in some way, I guess, to prevent the scenario we got into around, say, lime scooters? So there's an option, the door is open, in essence, for, yeah, okay. Yeah, fully support that, as I do support the method of hydrolysis. Sounds fascinating.
Not enough explicit mention of Viking funerals. Other questions? I just had one around the desire from the ministry to transfer their responsibilities onto local authorities, the classic of the unfunded mandate genre. Are you aware that there was any consideration given to handing that over to local district health boards, which, you know, if their concern is that there's local community input into decision making, they do have a structure around the country of community elected representatives?
So is the question about all of the proposed switches? Because there's a few in there that propose whether it's disinterment or
Oh, I see.
there's a number of suggested options in the Ministry of Health's paper that would shift over to local government, and some we're supporting and some we're suggesting work really well currently. So why change? And it appears some of the rationale behind it is around the onerous nature of the work, but then the examples given are few and far between. So, as far as we're aware, has that answered your question?
We're not aware of any sort of testing with district health boards. As far as I know, it's just sort of gone straight to the Ministry of Health and to local authority.
Thanks. Other questions? Anyone like to move? We approve. Oh, Councillor Staines? Do you have a question?
I'm happy to move.
Moved Councillor Staines, seconded Councillor Gary. Would you like to speak to it, Councillor? Who are the speakers? I'll put the motion. All those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? That's agreed. Thank you. Item 8. Safer. Sorry. Dr. Bidrose and Mr. Drew are speaking to this report. Safer CBD streets. Welcome, Simon. Do you have any comments you wish to make in opening, either of you? No, thank you. Councillor Houlihan.
Oh, I think you had yours.
I was first, but you
Yeah,
go.
but I'm happy for Councillor Vandervis to go first, if you
Agreed.
like.
Someone asked a question.
Well,
Councillor Vandervis.
you go first.
I was just wanting to indicate that I'm happy to move option 1.
I've already got a motion that I've drafted. Sorry, I should have mentioned that at the beginning, but that's helpful to know it's not wildly dissimilar.
Sorry, just to clarify, you've got a motion which you have drafted.
That's right.
I've just said I wish to move option 1.
Yes, and should the motion fail, you'd be able to foreshadow that. But I can assure you that it's not wildly dissimilar to the intention of the recommendation as drafted.
So are you saying that a mayoral motion will always take precedence?
No, it's saying it is first.
No, just I had already received it from myself.
By yourself?
That's right. Sorry, I could have made that clearer at the beginning.
It's actually not that funny.
Oh, you're not very funny.
There's a process issue here. I'd quite like someone to clarify it.
What is the procedural issue?
The procedural issue is if someone wishes to move a motion and says so, is there anywhere in standing orders that says that can be trumped by the mayor deciding that his own motion is going to take precedence?
Don't know. Happy to take advice though. I'll move that we adjourn the meeting. Seconded, Councillor Staines. All those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? That's agreed.
It is a point I thought someone would have raised.
Unadjourned, yes?
I call the meeting to order.
So it's for the chair to choose any motion they wish as the first motion. In this case, Mayor Hawkins had sent the GSO in advance of this item a proposed motion, and that is the one that will be the first motion considered under this item. Should that fail, then it's free for any other member to move a subsequent motion.
Can you identify the standing order that says as much?
Standing orders are not totally clear on this, but it does say motions must be in writing in 22.2, which this was sent to the GSO. Standing orders also say that where there is no provision or insufficient provision, the chairperson has the power to decide all matters.
Can I?
So, to clarify, are you saying that because the chair is allowed to insist that a motion must be in writing, and his own was, that he's therefore able to put his own motion up first?
No, what I'm saying is that the chair had provided a motion. The options in a staff report are just that, and it's free for the meeting to move any one of those or an alternative motion, and that's what's happened in this case.
In terms of precedence, I'm still not clear where it says standing orders gives the mayor that right.
Where it's not, if standing orders are not clear or specific about any item, standing orders very clearly state that where there is no provision, the chairperson's ruling is final.
Okay, thank you. I'll accept that.
I've got.
Thank you. You've got Councillor, unless if you don't have specific questions, Councillor Van.
I have a question about this too.
Well, this issue has been dealt with.
But I have a question about this for process.
Are you raising a point of order, Councillor?
Yes, point of order.
What's your point of order, sir?
Surely a motion in writing, as included in the minutes, will take precedence against a notional motion in writing that is not written anywhere that we can see. I can't see a motion in writing that you've raised. I can only see a motion.
Sorry, what's the point of order?
Well, the writing and motion take precedence.
The
motion in writing takes precedence. This is the only motion in writing.
That's.
Can I, yeah.
If your argument, I'll do the work for you. If your argument is that it's out of order, I would point you to the fact that I have ruled on it, as is allowed under standing orders.
Could
you have
I
a question
just...
on the report?
Well, I just wanted to ask something about that, but it's just that you're so good normally, you know, like you always say, I want to foreshadow. No, all the time, most of the time, that you say, I want to foreshadow, I've got this motion. In this case, I hadn't heard that. That's what I'm just wanting for a process for me, learning. Does that mean that we don't need to circulate motions? I thought we had to circulate them through the GSOs and everyone knew them. That's all I wanted to ask. Sorry, Your Worship.
There's certainly no, while I accept that would probably have been better practice, there's no obligation to circulate things in advance. I sent it through for administrative efficiency in advance of this. Yeah, you can pull it up whenever. Questions of the report? Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have a question on number 11 about the cost of the shared space being $25,000. In the media, it's been reported as $40,000, and then I think from somewhere else I might have heard that it actually cost council $2,500. Can you please clarify what the actual cost of the street was?
So council approved a budget up to $40,000. The works to date have cost about $25,000. Of that $25,000, NZTA co-funded 90%. So DCC had paid $2,500 for the works to date.
Thank you.
Councillor Lord.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Oh, well, I haven't had time to read that. What I was going to ask the question, though, is there any reason why we need to remove the dots? If we increase the speed limit to 30 again, I've got no problem with the dots, to be quite honest. I voted against this because I thought, the right colour.
Order.
Lost opportunity for the Reds. But no, look, I don't have a problem with the dots. Now, I think it's patently obvious that people chose not to walk on the roads at 10. Would there be any reason why they're at a greater risk of walking on the roads? Like, would there be any danger if we left the dots there and resumed the speed limit back to 30? Because I don't really have a problem with them. I think they're still in good order. They will probably last at least another 2 to 3 months. I think they bring a wee bit of diversity, a wee bit of sort of freshness. They're different. And
I think the question's been made quite clear. Mr. Drew?
Oh, sorry. I thought,
rhetorical.
No, we just want to test the dots at 30 kilometres an hour on a motorbike. So we've had some feedback that the dots are slippery for motorbikes in the wet. We've been monitoring that with the parking wardens at 10 kilometres an hour, going slowly, and there's no perceived issues. But it's certainly an option to leave the dots there. I just want to caveat with, we'll test the dots in the wet on a motorbike at 30 kilometres an hour.
But we could just add a gritting agent. I mean, one of the options for removing the dots is black paint with a gritting agent. That's probably the easiest way to remove them. So certainly it would be cheaper not to remove them. But we would almost certainly want to add a gritting agent to the surface just to make sure they're not slippery for cyclists and motorcyclists.
Councillor?
No, that's fine.
Councillor Wiley?
Thank you, Worship. Mr. Drew, in just response to a question A few minutes ago, you talked about the cost to council being 2,500 out of the 25,000, with 90% of that being paid for by the NZTA. My understanding is that they will also pay for additional work to return the street to normal, up to $40,000 in total?
That's our understanding. It's for all the measures, but staff are following up with the NZTA to confirm it's for removal. We don't have that in writing, but it's our understanding.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Raddick.
Yes, just back to the dots. It appears to me that they have, there's quite a bit of paint worn off them already, and they're fading quite quickly, and it appears to me that probably 4 to 6 weeks they'll be all gone. Do you agree with that?
We expect them to last 3 to 4 months.
Right, 3 to 4 months.
But what you'll find is they'll wear on the wheel tracks earlier than the rest of the dock.
Yeah. So if we just leave them and they'll just disappear.
Yes.
Councillor Houlihan.
I think my question has been answered by Councillor Wiley's question, because I was going to ask how
Councillor
much
Elder.
is it to get rid of the dots, but it sounds like you'll be able to get that money back, is it? Yeah.
Councillor Elder.
So to clarify then, if all the funding for putting them in and taking them away is given by the government, then it's only 2,500 that we've paid theoretically.
Yeah, to date, there'll be removal costs.
Yes, but
which NZTA we understand NZTA will 90% fund.
So it's not a phenomenal amount of money.
No.
My other question is, if we do keep the dots there, my question would be, would that be a confusing message to the public, given we're looking at reversing the measures? What's your thoughts on that matter?
Yeah, I'm not sure how the majority of the public... What I would say is that the speed data from last year, the average speed through George Street was 28 kilometres an hour. The speed data from the last week, average speed is about 22 kilometres an hour. So whilst people are not going 10 kilometres an hour, it's made a significant drop in the speeds through George Street. And that was after the pedestrian phasing was changed back to normal.
There's a couple of other things. The dots on the roadway weren't an invention from our staff. So this is a mechanism that's been used in other cities. Auckland, where we have seen, and I think it's Hobson Street, or a couple of streets in Auckland, where they paint these large colourful dots on the road as a sort of way of signalling that there's a lot of people around, that you need to pay a bit of attention. This part of town's different to most other parts of town. So we didn't invent it, we copied it off someone else. So we wouldn't be the only place if they were left. But on the other hand, we can paint over them.
And the other question was also about cyclists and paint. Would that create a danger for cyclists slipping over just as much as motorbikes?
But the treatment we would do would deal with both cyclists and motorcycles, exactly the same treatment. So whatever we do has to deal for both of them, and it's the similar treatment.
It's certainly something we've been cognisant of and monitoring, and deliberately sprayed the paint very thin to make sure the inherent roughness of the road was coming through.
And my other question was actually sort of related to that. How does that operate when it's icy?
Yeah, so the heavy frosts in George Street are rare, so we talked about this before we installed them, and our maintenance contractor is ready to apply grit if there was a heavy frost in George Street, but I think of the data we looked at last year, there was 2 heavy frosts in George Street, so it's not a common occurrence, but ready if it did happen.
Thank you.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Your Worship. Mr Drew, just for those who seem a little confused about the matter, could you clarify, did we or did we not put speed bumps into George Street as part of this package?
No, we didn't. We always said we would monitor, and Council would then decide if they were required or not. And as I pointed out before, the speed did drop through Central City.
And we heard from a retailer in George Street that in fact the package of of traffic calming and free parking, etc., had in fact attracted people back to the centre of the city. What were the observations around social distancing? Because this has been an evolving matter. We put them in place for the purposes of keeping our residents safe while we dealt with level 2. What's been your observation on that count? Because that was the whole reason we made that decision.
Yeah, so we were wrestling with this at the same time a lot of other councils were as well, which is how much social distancing are people going to want to do as we move from level 3 to level 2? And we were completely crystal ball gazing, so we had no ability to tell. You'll see that we did do a survey of our people's panel, so they're a self-selected group of, I think, 3,000 or so, quite a few people on our survey list. Generally, the feedback we get from them pretty much mirrors feedback we get when we do whole of city surveys, so they're a pretty reliable bunch to ask. We asked them, was the need to social distancing affect their shopping in supermarkets and affecting their shopping in the CBD and affecting their shopping elsewhere? It seems like people were treating the CBD pretty much the same as everywhere else. The CBD was of no heightened concern to people, even though you can't do physical distancing 2 metres if you're walking two abreast. It's pretty much impossible on the footpaths. So we noticed pretty much immediately we moved to level 2, people were hugging in the street, rushing up, crossing the road and flinging their arms around each other. People's need to do social distancing of 2 metres from strangers appeared scant. Of course, this was right as we were starting to say there are no new cases, there's no community transmission. Dunedin, the South Island doesn't have much. So it would probably be a week to 10 days in, and we were pretty clear that people were seeming to express no desire to do social distancing in town or not a concern, people who were in town. I think there would be more people crossing the roads than normal, like zigzagging backwards and forwards. And so the slow traffic wasn't bad for that, but certainly there were very few people who felt the need to step out into the roadway. A part of that might have been the decision because we'd made the decision not to remove parking. And what some other locations have done is removed all parking and then effectively made that next 2 metres of the footpath extension. So, taped it off or painted that to be footpath. That seems to have been more likely to generate people doing social distancing than having to walk past the cars onto the road. And what might have been an ill-fated attempt not to outrage people, some businesses, we decided not to move parking. Probably didn't help with the outrage, but it maybe affected people not doing the social distancing.
Thank you. And my last question is around the free parking, because it seems to have got lost in the conversations, might I say, particularly in the media, but that was a very important part of the package. Any observations, any further observations about the free parking and how it was received? I know I've noticed some people in the community didn't know it was still going on, actually. They thought that they had to pay for parking, so they have. Has that been your experience?
Yeah, it has. It's been mixed. There's been some people didn't know, some people that have been very complimentary, but largely it's gone unnoticed would be my observation.
Thank you.
Councillor Lord.
Yeah, look, I'll just go back to my question about the dots and say, if we were to leave them, say, for another month, and then at what stage would you normally say, like you said, you think 3 to 4 months, but I think you do get to a point where they suddenly look scruffy. So would it be possible to just, and I asked the mover this too, would you consider changing the speed limit, leaving the dots there until at such time going forward, Mr. Drew thinks that they've lost their niceness to the point where then you have to spend the money? So that would be one question for you to think about. The other question is, if we left them there now as a beauty enhancement, so to speak, would that run the risk of not getting the 90% subsidy of cleaning them up?
I don't think so, but I can confirm that with NZTA. And leaving them there for a bit longer would certainly help us catch up on some maintenance activities. Effectively, we're taking our maintenance contractor from jobs that people want done to bring them into the CBD. And we're still catching up on COVID, where we didn't have those jobs being done, so it would be helpful for staff. But we can do whatever the council wants.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lofisel.
My question's been answered, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor O'Malley.
you, Bishop. So the dots can be considered a traffic calming activity? Would that be?
That's generally the intention of them in the guidance document that we have.
Given the speed limit moved, the speed use down about 4 kilometres an hour, do you think, well, I'm not allowed to ask this opinion, but
6 kilometres.
I'll wait for my speech. I want to touch on the cost of the program, $25,000 to do of which we pay 10%. I think that's been well traversed today. At $135,000 a week lost revenue potential for 3 weeks, that's $400,000. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So we've committed to $400,000 of free parking and $2,500 worth of dots.
That's correct.
Just wanted to get perspective there. And
We need to just temper that a little. That's $135,000 a week in a normal week.
Yes.
It would probably be fair to assume there's been some decrease,
Okay.
but I would,
So
given that the
300,000.
Dunedin spend in Dunedin economy is now 1.7% above the same week last year, and last week it was 1% above the same week last year. It does seem we picked up pretty quickly. You're probably comfortable to say that 135's right now, but the first week maybe it was a bit off that.
Yeah, thank you. So upper limit of 400 and something below that compared to the cost of the dots. And obviously if we extend it to the 1st of July, we'll be extending it an additional $400,000 worth of. Now, I guess my question is to finance, is that lost revenue?
So when we do our end of year, we'll be having a look at that and working out where the wash up for that lies.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Worship. Point 15 about the People's Panel survey. Was the survey asked if people were aware of the measures that were being taken in the central city and whether they found that they felt safer or more inclined to go to the CBD? Because some of those reasons that we had looked at those measures was around enabling people to feel safer going into the central city, and I just wondered whether the actual consumers felt safer going into the central city.
No, so there were 2 surveys that were done. One was of, as you're aware, I think it's in the report, Enterprise Dunedin visited every retailer they could find. They spoke to 68 of the 76. They were reminded of what the traffic calming measures were and why they were put in place, just to make sure they knew, which is interesting because 20 of the 68 didn't know why we'd painted dots on the road, which is interesting because everyone had got pamphlets and so on, but still it is quite hard to get these kind of messages across despite all the advertising and social media and so on. With the People's Panel survey, it was a simple set of questions about have you changed your shopping habits, nothing else.
Thank you.
Councillor Wiley.
Thank you, Worship. Mr. Drew, so earlier you mentioned that with the dots, we'd gone from essentially a 10 kilometre speed limit, and the average speed was 22 kilometres per hour. And previously at the 30 kilometres per hour, we'd had an average of 28 kilometres per hour. Leaving the dots on the road, the association that most people have now is that it's a 10 kilometre per hour with the dots. Would leaving the dots on the road cause further confusion? And again, it's a bit of a rhetorical question in some sense in saying...
Potentially, it's hard to say. We would probably keep the tube counters in the street and monitor traffic speeds and numbers of vehicles to see what the impact is if council chose to leave the dots there.
Okay, and then I guess when I'm looking at the motion in front of us, and this is probably more of a question of the Mayor as the mover of this motion, that we're referencing here reversing all temporary changes. So I would anticipate that's whatever the motion is voted on would be the outcome, I guess. Would that be the correct?
Oh, that's how we'd probably take it from the Mayor's motion, yes.
As it currently reads, that's right, that would include the dots.
Councillor Walker.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Drew. A couple of questions which have temporarily slipped my mind. Oh yes, considering, I guess, the modus operandi originally of the dots was was a safety measure, have there been any incidents during the dot trial?
Not that no traffic or safety incidents that have been reported to me.
Great, that's good news. Second question stems from the fact that I was with 2 English tourists yesterday who were freedom camping and had hit Dunedin, and the first thing they said to me when they saw me was, wow, what a funky city, those dots are great. Have you had any, for want of a better word, any dot advocacy? People contacting council saying, wow, they're great, please keep them?
So in the survey, in the retailer survey, I think there was a few who asked to keep the dots or to have them extended, said they'd really liked it. A few asked to keep the 10-kilometre. It wasn't universally hated, despite what some might lead you to believe. There's a chunk of people that really did seem to quite like it.
Thank you.
Councillor Buck.
Given that we're looking at going to level 1 and we don't know how long that might last because we might go back up to level 2, would you consider putting the dots back at level 2? So should we keep the dots in case we go back to level 2? Would that kind of be sensible?
Be the lowest cost option if that was to happen.
Councillor Hall.
It says up there, remove all traffic calming. Would it not be better to put something in to say excluding the dots at the present time? It says remove all.
Oh, that would be another option.
Because that says we've got to remove the dots.
Apparently we're at level 1 from midnight tonight.
Oh,
Right. See all the pub.
Told you that last week.
Wow.
Wise old sage.
I got an email to say it was.
Gosh.
Anyway, so,
wow.
that certainly would be an option. It wouldn't. That's not what this means. But I'm amenable to.
No, but what it
changing
says up there, it says reversing all.
Yeah.
So you
Which
remove an
was my
amendment.
intention, but I'm open to
Amendment.
amending it. Councillor Benson Pope.
Thank you, Your Worship. The Chief Executive made a comment about the retailer's attitude to the dots. Was there any feedback about the parking, the availability of parking or free parking or not?
One said they'd liked it, but nobody did ask to extend that. But I think it would be fair to assume from other media that they had thought it was useful.
Councillor Reddick.
So, for questions, yeah? So,
yeah.
Just about the dots, is how do we deal with that? Because, I mean, I'm quite happy to leave the dots as they are. And so, how do we
Do you want me to help him craft it?
decide whether or not to change the motion?
The easiest way to do it would be to, and it would be entirely complementary to the intention of the motion. So if someone wanted to move an amendment to say that, whether it's yourself and or Councillor Lord and I'm happy to adjourn the meeting for 5 minutes if that would aid in the process of drafting one, but that would be the easiest option from a procedural point of view. Would that be helpful?
Yes.
I'd be happy to.
Okay, that's fine.
With someone's help.
I'll move that we adjourn the meeting. Second, Councillor Gary. All those in favour? Aye. Those against? That's agreed. amendment into the substantive motion, but I think technically I need to seek the leave of the meeting to do that, do I?
You do.
All right, we'll put that there. It's been seconded by Councillor Lord.
You're happy to second.
But I'll seek leave of the meeting to amend this, to make this the substantive motion. All those in favour?
No.
Aye.
No.
And then I get to those against.
Oh. No.
Carried. Thank you.
Oh.
But I'm still happy to take questions if people have them on the report.
Are you mad?
Sorry, Councillor Manners.
Yeah, but this
Just
means
wondering,
I have to vote against this,
what
and
is
I
the
want
plan
it to
for the
happen.
75 10K
Oh,
signs
this is
now?
disgusting. I can't believe it. I'm stunned.
Sorry,
do they just go into storage or?
Yeah, go to storage, so the next time it's just you change the number. So
Okay.
we'll
I'm not
use them
abstaining.
on
I
the
want
projects.
it to stop,
Thank
but
you.
I don't want the
Hold on,
dogs
sorry, can we
left
have one
there.
person talking at a time, Councillor? It's somewhat distracting, given the
Oh.
microphone situation. Further questions? No? Well, just in speaking to this, and I'll be brief, and it has been covered already, but this was a $40,000 envelope, if you like, to deliver a range of things to support safe physical distancing in the city centre in an alert level 2 environment, and in a way that encouraged people to come back into the city centre safely. And we gave staff the flexibility to operate within that with a range of interventions within that $40,000 budget. As we've heard, only $25,000 of that was spent, and thanks to our application for funding being successful, only $2,500 of that comes from Council's budgets. And for my mind, that is a small price to pay for what was effectively a precautionary approach to let people return to the city centre and do so safely. Because we didn't know at that point whether it was going to be a deterrent to people or not. And it seemed sensible to me that we would at least give people the option of doing that if that was going to be a barrier to them returning. And I've had a lot of people ask whether I think this has been a failure or not, and I don't think that's necessarily the case. It does look like that it proved unnecessary, but I don't think it hasn't been a huge commitment that we've made in terms of doing something that proved to be unnecessary. And I don't know whether that was the fact that we were in alert level 2, or when we got to the point where there were 0 active cases in the southern DHB region, it became more and more difficult to get people to buy into the public health guidelines that they were being asked to follow as a result of the progress that had been made. And so whether it's, in correlation isn't causation, I don't know what caused this, but we've certainly, as we've had reported back on the agenda and at this meeting, we've got retail spend back on par or above where we were at this point last year, despite the fact that, as the People's Panel survey shows us also, there is still a fair deal of reticence in the community to returning to business as usual. So in spite of that, we've got solid levels of trading back in the city centre, which is helpful. When I first started in this line of work, someone once suggested to me that the smaller the amount of money, the longer and more visceral the debate might be, and I don't think I've found a single better example of that than this. That over $2,500 of council money, some paint on the road and asking people to drive a little more slowly through the city centre, the sheer, I use the word visceral intentionally, the visceral response that this has elicited from people for whatever reason has been disappointing and a bit embarrassing actually at times, and I would hope that people might have the opportunity to reflect on that as we return to something more resembling normality in our day-to-day lives. And I understand that there's been a lot of the mental health implications of what we have been asked to do from a public health point of view aren't insignificant. And so let us be charitable in interpreting the nature of the feedback that has been received around this issue as being accredited to that. But as has been said, this is a $2,500 project versus the foregone revenue of up to $135,000 a week, which has attracted considerably less attention, and if the people who have been, if the people who have objected on the basis of it being a waste of council spending, I find it hard to believe that the $40,000 figure is the peak of the concern. I'm comfortable with keeping the paint on the road. My concern was really around whether that would elicit further confusion as we change the speed limit back. But as is also pointed out, that the driver behaviour hasn't changed that significantly in that period of time, so I think there's probably a minimal risk. And while my initial thoughts would be to reintroduce metered parking charges at the same time as we do this work, I think it's probably fairer to the community to allow a period of transition, because the last thing you want to do is to bring this back in tomorrow and then deal with the blowback from all of a sudden charging people for parking, which we haven't done for some months now. So I think allowing a period of transition, and it does respond to comments that have been made in the media and elsewhere by retailers in the city centre that they wanted to see that continue through to the end of the winter was the comment I read over the weekend, but this at least takes us to the end of the financial year. Further speakers? Oh, sorry, Councillor Lord.
Yeah, look, I originally voted against this. I voted against it just on the basis of the speed limit. I personally don't have a problem. I can drive at 10 k's. It's not something I like to do on a regular basis. But I didn't think that in itself would make much difference. But as far as the dots goes, look, if anyone's going to get wound up about leaving those dots there, I think they need to have a good think about it. I think the stuff that I saw on Facebook and social media just gets my dander up more and more when I see some of our staff getting abused and some people making very ill-informed comments, and I expect and I respect that people have a view that may be different to mine or may be different to this council's decision, and it's a council decision that made those, and even though I wasn't part of it, I mean, even though I was against it, I become part of the final decision because the majority of us voted to support those dots. But I just don't really see any reason why we would need to remove them at this stage. I don't think anyone's really worried about the dots, they're worried about the speed limit. And I think they do, as I said earlier, give a bit of, in my question, they give a bit of vibrancy to the city and something a wee bit different. And if it's something that brightens our day, I'm happy to see them stay there. And look, we may have to readdress this in a month's time if they are starting to look more haggard. But I think staff are clever enough to know when that time is ready or to update. I love the blue. No surprises here. Happy for the red to go.
A proposal was to paint them all over in black, reuse all the help they could get. Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have serious concerns about leaving the dots on the road, and I'll tell you why. I'm a mother with young children. The first thing the kids did when they saw the dots, they went, "Oh, Mum, look, we can play on the road. Look at these playful dots." And I said, no, they're there to walk through because we're trying to make the streets softer so you can have safer, so you can have distancing. Well, I voted against this, so I didn't vote for it anyway, so I wasn't trying to make the street safer because personally I do not believe it was doing that. So that's why I didn't vote for it in the first place. However, I have serious concerns about leaving these dots because people will think if the dots are there that it's still safe to walk out onto those areas. Now, cars are going to be going 30k, I believe, now, if we put in these changes. Is that correct? Okay, no quick answers. So my understanding is that the cars will now be going 30 kilometres and people will still walk out on that street. I think if we agree to this motion, we could see lives in danger. I also want to raise the point that this issue, and I still feel upset about it, I really do. After our last debate on this issue, I got off I think it was a Zoom meeting, can't remember now, it's a blur, but I was shaking. And I know, as you know, I get quite emotional about things, but I rang a close friend and I said, oh my God, I've just been told that if I vote against this motion, I am voting to have blood on my hands. And I said I would never do that. I would never do that to anyone. I would never make things unsafe in our city. And that's what I was told. I have young children, and I would never vote for something that was unsafe. My friend, thank God, had common sense and said she actually works in the health industry. She said, Carmen, that's ridiculous. She said, if there was any concerns, she said the Director General of Health would say, this is what we have to do. He did not. Also, other cities would do it. They did not. So I dispute we even needed this, and I think, in my personal opinion, it was emotional blackmail to put that on us who voted against that motion. And if we vote for this, I'm saying now people are in danger, especially kids that are going to run out. The photo in the ODT had a child playing on the dots. So what does that tell you? And it still looks like it's a safe street.
Councillor Walker.
Yeah, thank you. Listen, for me, Council made a decision at a time when, I guess, as the CEO has mentioned, we were all feeling in the dark. And I do remember back to it, for me, it was a decision made with good intentions at its heart. They were to help people socially distance and to try and give a bit of a leg up to struggling businesses at that time. But it was relatively clear, again, as Bidrose pointed out, that very early on in the piece, people were very reluctant to follow the government dictates. And I agree, I saw lots of hugging and high-fiving as well. Above and beyond that, some of the overblown and hyperbolic reaction that the Mayor talked about, initiated with people's best interests at heart, for me, have been extraordinary. Over-the-top reporting from our friends at the Fourth Estate have certainly not been unhelpful, actually, as have some of the comments of some of the people at this table, to be honest. But thankfully, as we've just heard about the announcement that will come into play tonight around going to level 1, as the envy of the world, we are moving back to a sense of normality. Dots on the road didn't cause Dunedin to fall into a pit of hopelessness. In fact, I suspect the opposite, to be honest, from what I've heard. No, it didn't cost 40k, and no, we don't have hundreds of signs sitting around in a warehouse, unused. They can be used, the numbers can simply be changed. And, Councillor Radic, you can be assured that speed humps that didn't exist have also been removed. As I said at the beginning, the decision was made with good intentions at its heart at a time of uncertainty for us all. In hindsight, would I have voted the same way? Who knows? But as an elected member, I will certainly always vote in a way that I feel best protects the community in which I live. I do have one little concern about the motion in front of us. The excluding dots in bracket, for me, reads as if we're keeping the dots ad infinitum. There's no mention there that they're actually on the way out. So I think we might potentially get a bit of pushback from that. The second part of it I fully support also. I think that's just an extra leg up for businesses. That said, I was in town on Saturday, the place was packed, and as we've heard, the tills are ringing, sales are up. But I do support, I think that's a good gesture that we send out to the public. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you, Worship. Obviously, the announcements just in the last hour or two make this moot, because it didn't matter if we chose option 1 or option 2, the outcome's the same. And in fact, we've moved to something else, which is a design of the motion as it sits in front of us. And I want to point out, again, my general feeling of the difficulty of doing design in this meeting. Because just to talk about the dots alone has taken up a fair amount of time, and we had to actually adjourn twice in this agenda item, I think at least once. And we didn't talk about now, are we reversing the liberalisation of street trading? It didn't even come up. When we had the original motion that was in front of us, we had a number of design concepts to think about, and we really didn't have an opportunity to work them through, and therefore we voted on what was in front of us. And that's what I am saying about when a motion appears in front of us. Even though our intentions are good, and I don't believe anybody has evil intention to force stuff through, the very structure of the meeting itself and the mechanism by which we exchange information tends to result in the motion that's in front of you being the one that is likely to go through. So I'm happy that this is the motion in front of us, but again, if we wanted to talk about the parking, we would have to then go and have another amendment to the resolution, another vote as to whether we wanted to separate that in or separate it out. These are things that are quite better, I think, discussed loosely before we come in, so that we can come up with something that's easy to debate on. To the dots themselves, confusion versus traffic calming, I think would be what you have to ask yourself that question. Is it confusing, or does it create an environment where the cars are entering the environment and they know this is not like a normal road because the dots are sitting there? The pedestrians are, by virtue of the presence of those dots, more likely to say, I actually want to use this space as well. And so we're starting to work by just a simple pattern on the road, changing the environment to make it a more shared environment. The question that would really be is, did the speed come down because people were trying to observe the 10-kilometre speed limit, or did it come down because they realised they'd entered a special space and that in fact the dots are going to remain there, so are they going to maintain that space? I think that'll be something that we should be following, because if we see the speed limit go back up, then we know that they had no effect. But I suspect that it will rise a little bit, it won't go all the way back to the 28 kilometres, which is what I was saying in the question and I realised in the speeches. And so basically that's it really. I think I would like the dots to stay, because I think it's actually giving us a chance to explore the idea of what could we make George Street and Princess Street without any particularly major changes. If they turn out that we don't like dots, they'll go away all by themselves. Thank you.
Councillor Elder.
Hi, I will support this motion, but I, like Carmen, am quite concerned about excluding the dots, and I would like to see some ongoing sort of investigation of the consequences of it. For example, slippery, for example, confusing, etc. So that in fact we can kind of review that as we go along, because indeed, you know, there are aspects which Jim says, you know, maybe it's a good thing because it encourages, you know, people to see the area as a sort of slow area, but at the same time I do believe there's risk in health and safety, and also confusion in the community. Have we gone to 30k or have we not? And I think on talking to my hairdresser actually, when I always talk to everybody about what's happening, she said her mum was quite confused, and she's an old elderly lady and she's a bit hesitant and feeling a bit hesitant about going back into town. And I'm just thinking we really need to be very clear about the messaging that we send out, that if we keep the dots, then we need to be saying we have changed, it is 30k now, an hour now, and there is free parking. I really applaud the free parking until July the 1st, and I was actually going to move that as well. The reason being, partly because that conversation with my hairdresser actually, that there's a lot of people with disabilities, a lot of people who are vulnerable and who are older, who are a bit scared to get back into town again. They've lost a bit of confidence, and now that level 1 has been announced, I think those people will feel a bit more confident to go into town. I know my mum, for example, she's 86, she hadn't driven the car for a long time, and so those are the kinds of things that having free parking kind of encourages people to get back into town and take advantage of the free parking. And noting that we've got the first live audience in a sports event in the whole world coming up, I think encouraging people into the hospitality and retail area at this time will help our retailers, our hospitality to recover quicker and to support employment, and I'm all for that. So Yeah, I will support, but I do believe that we really need to keep an eye on those dots.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Your Worship. For those who are vulnerable in our community, for whom catching COVID-19 could well have been a death sentence, and I don't say that as a matter of emotional blackmail, I say that as an informed opinion. And the Director General's direction to keep a 2-metre distance was really important in regards to that. And so, as Council, we had a moral responsibility with the information we had at the time, and albeit I can't remember what day we went into level 2 or what day we went into level 3, quite frankly, it's been a moving picture. But we had a moral responsibility to do something. We asked the advice of the staff who have expertise in these matters, as much as anyone has expertise in terms of a response to a global pandemic, for goodness sake. But we have experts in terms of traffic calming, and this was always a package. Now, we as Council chose to implement just some of the package, not all of it, and did the best we could with the information we had to keep our citizens safe. We did it to encourage people to come back into the CBD and to support our businesses, and it included free parking. Sadly, that was not reported terribly accurately in the media. In fact, I messaged the media about that because I was really concerned that the important phrase around why we were doing it for social distancing was not included in that report. So our community was confused, and that confusion continued, because you can correct it as many times as you like, people remember the first thing they hear. And I've had numerous conversations with people in the community who thought we were doing it around some other plan. So we did it for safety, we did it to support the businesses, and what we're saying now is the 10-kilometre speed limit is going, the dots are going, but not just yet, and there will be free parking continuing till the 1st of July, and I want to acknowledge my colleague, Councillor Fiso, and her view around that and inputting into that. So I'm very comfortable with this decision if it passes, and I would say that it's going to be really important to have very clear comms around this, and I do hope that the media reports it accurately as to the reason why we might be making this decision and what we are deciding on, so that the community is left in no doubt about the decision.
Thank you. Councillor Wiley.
Thank you, Worship. When we look at this motion in front of us, it ends the safer CBD streets traffic calming. And when we look at the report that we were given, it was CBD, Central Business District, to 30 kilometres an hour, remove the temporary dots and markings, and remove the free CBD parking and free commercial use of footpaths. So there's really 4 elements of that. I guess the part that I look at is the last line of the of paragraph 1 or motion 1, and that is as soon as practical. And I believe that is the key. We can get George Street back to some sort of normality within a very short time, because there's not a lot of barriers to fix. Take down some signs, put the old ones up. Advise the restaurants and businesses that may have had temporary trading that that rule was changing. And then we also look at the parking through to the 30th of June, and away we go. Like many, I'm not a fan of the dots, and I believe there will be confusion. But the key thing here, for me, is that the community sees there are no barriers to George Street. They come back and support the George Street businesses and the retailers. They come and visit, and they come and spend their money. And hopefully next week we may see a 2% increase over last year's retail spend. But the key thing is, the message needs to go out that everybody can come and enjoy George Street, just like they could last week, but the perception is gone, and I think that's the important part. So I will support this.
Thank you. Councillor Reddick.
Yes. The council went out quite on a limb with this COVID response, being the only council in New Zealand, to my knowledge, that did such a thing.
No, that's not true.
To my knowledge.
Well, he's got his 5 minutes.
That is true.
Carry on.
Point of order.
What's the point of order?
Interruption, and an incorrect interruption at that.
No, I was clarifying your assertion that we were the only council that did anything.
No, it's an inappropriate interruption, and it's simply not true. I said, to my knowledge, and I don't know, whatever, and I still don't know, I don't need to know who else may have done it. So,
Continue.
on the point of order.
I won't uphold the point of order, but I'll ask you to continue with your comments.
Point of order, Your Worship. Are you saying that Councillor Raddick is a liar?
No, I'm not saying that.
When you say that it's not true, his statement, surely you're implying that he's trying to mislead council or that he's lying.
No, I'm not making either of those statements.
So why do you then say that the statement that he made, to his knowledge, is not the case? When he's the only one that can know that for sure.
What's the point of order, Councillor?
The point of order is, I believe you're being disrespectful to Councillor Raddick and that you're implying that he's being somehow dishonest or lying in making a statement ending in to his knowledge.
Well,
given that you can't know the state of his mind.
Indeed. And that certainly wasn't my intention. I was clarifying the facts of the statement that Councillor Raddick had made.
The fact, Your Worship, is a different fact to what Councillor Raddick actually said.
I'm not upholding the point of order, Councillor, and I'd ask Councillor Raddick to continue with his comments.
To my knowledge, Dunedin was the only council that instigated a whole lot of measures like this, including put dots on the road. And I think there's a very large amount of community derision about the whole program, about that COVID response. And I think a very large number of members of the community think that it was completely not only inappropriate but also ineffective in protecting anyone from COVID. However, this could have been avoided with some community consultation, and this is an ideal topic for a central city advisory group to co-design, co-create, be engaged with and to discuss in advance of doing it, and that wouldn't need to take very long to achieve that at all. So it's a very good argument for having a fully inclusive central city advisory group, including good representation from the stakeholders whose lives and livelihoods are most affected, namely the central city retailers. And I think, based on what this discussion we've had today and the evidence from Mr. Drew, that the dots slowed the traffic, not the speed signs.
Yeah.
And so it'd be interesting to see how the speed down George Street changes as the dots remain in place but gradually wear out. So whilst they might present a little bit of a hazard to people, I think they will continue to slow the traffic, which is a good thing. But the effect of putting up those speed signs and the dots help slow the traffic, but the speed signs are ignored. So with this COVID response, effectively made our citizens criminals by putting this COVID response in place, because people are very disinclined to ignore that 10 km/h speed limit. So it's a good thing that we're now taking it away today. That's what I would say.
Thank you. I can clarify for the councillor's benefit that the Dunedin City Council weren't the only territorial authority that implemented temporary measures in response to physical distancing requirements under the COVID-19 alert level system. Are there further speakers? Councillor Lawfisel.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd just like to record again my thanks to Dr. Bidrose and the staff for working under extreme pressure, given the deadlines and the various moving picture, as Councillor Gary said, of this COVID-19 lockdown. And we asked for this report and we got it. And so, and just the extraordinary patience with which all staff have had to deal with the challenges from within as well as without. And if it was up to me, I would be extending the free parking, because I'm just taking note of Jason Hood's comments in the ODT on Saturday that free parking had brought heaps of shoppers into the city, and he was hoping that it would be continued throughout winter, as his worship said so. But I'm very happy to support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. All those in favour?
Division, please. Aye.
Take a division.
Councillor Barker.
Aye.
Councillor Benson Pope.
Aye.
Councillor Elder.
Aye.
Councillor Gary.
Aye.
Councillor Hall.
Aye.
Councillor Houlihan.
No.
Councillor Lefiso.
Aye.
Councillor Lord.
Aye.
Councillor O'Malley.
Aye.
Councillor Raddick.
Aye.
Councillor Staines.
Aye.
Councillor Vandervis.
Yes.
Councillor Walker.
Aye.
Councillor Wiley.
Yes.
Your Worship.
Aye.
Carried 14-1.
Thank you. And I'll now move that to the order paper. And we move into non-public, allowing for Mr. Duff to remain in his sound engineering capacity. Seconded Councillor Elder. All those in favour? Aye. Those against? That's agreed. Thank you. Take a moment to remove our cameras.